Um, could you reflect on your nearly 60 years in journalism? I know it's a big question, Tom, but talk about looking back the key changes you have seen in news coverage over the 60 years in which you've been involved, which is most of the history of television news.
Well, there have been profound changes. People always say to me, "Oh, I remember when you were on the air, it was a lot better." And I said, "Wait a minute. There were three white guys delivering the news on three networks at night. We were doing the best that we could. Before us, I think the network news had a more international cast. That was the inclination of the producers. They were, there's a lot of people in Africa and South America and so on. But America, as I have often said, from the Hudson River west, didn't get the coverage it should have about the changes that were going on. And I think we began to change that. We began to reflect more about the texture of this country and what was happening culturally and politically and otherwise. But it was still, kind of constricted in a way. The women's movement didn't get the attention it deserved. They kind of mocked it at the beginning. They didn't have a lot of women covering it. It was, oh my God, they're burning their bras. I mean, that kind of thing. It was a serious movement. The most serious movement, of course, in so many ways, was the civil rights movement. My era had a lot to do with covering that well. And then we went through Watergate. Vietnam was a huge story. And the difference was that younger people were beginning to come along and be the decision makers in that. And then the technological change had a lot to do with it. We could get portable satellites up quickly and get on the air with stuff. And then from a small d democratic point of view, there was a greater variety of reporters and producers who were coming into the field. There were no women when I was coming along. I mean, Cassie Mackin was one, but and Leslie was there early. But by and large, it was a white male operation. And the demographics changed a fair amount. But the big change, there are two of them. Ted Turner was a genius. I mean, he changed communication forever, 24/7, all around the world with CNN. That was a huge change. The next big change was the digital age, because the marriage of the digital age with television came hand in hand. The downside of that is that you don't know who to trust in the digital age. There's so much false material that goes out there. It's malevolent and it's across the spectrum. I'm going to screw with their heads a little bit here today, and I'm going to put out this thing that looks like it's authentic, and it's not. So, and we're reading about Facebook now and what they're going through and all these other agencies. So we have to be aware of that. And then the face of television news changed. Many more women, many more ethnic people on there, more representation of our population. And the reason that's important is not just for cosmetic reasons, is that the people who come from those different parts of the country bring with them their knowledge of the culture and the economy and the challenges that are going on. And so it's a constant struggle to try to find that balance at the same time. And then the place of network news is pretty much under assault because it's 24/7 in so many other places that you can go get the news. So when Lester comes on the air at night, or when they come on, Mr. Muir comes on the air at ABC, or the new young man at CBS, people have seen almost everything that they're seeing then. And so my argument is always, give them something they haven't seen. Tell them something that's important. I'll give you a good example. I have a granddaughter who's a student at Columbia. She's meeting me for a big event tonight. And she bought a fancy dress. I thought she bought a fancy dress. She didn't buy it. She rented it. And it turns out, among young people, that's a huge deal. They're renting wardrobes now. They don't want to invest in permanence. And she rented a dress for the night. My wife said, I was with somebody the other day who rents her entire wardrobe on a weekly basis and then turns it back in. These are huge changes. They're not getting enough attention, frankly.
Let's talk about, as we're bringing it up to date and talking about challenges of news coverage. There's a particular challenge now in covering news in the age of President Trump, where he has declared journalists as the enemy, perhaps declared truth as the enemy.
Yeah, I think he plays to his audience. I think that there's a huge audience out there that doesn't buy into what he is saying about him, frankly. I think his excesses have cost him politically. This recent election was as much a rejection of his style and his inability to, it's not just to be gracious, but to be authentic. Because every newspaper in the country is talking about this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. His core group believes that it's true. I have a friend who's in that group. I've known him since I was in high school, and I can't. I said, Bill, here's the evidence. You know, he said this. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. But there is a wide body of people in this country who are saying, oh, "Come on, what's he trying to do?" And our job as journalists is to stay cool and not make it personal, but be professional about it and make the case that what he is saying is excessive or inappropriate, but not be afraid to say when he's right as well. Early in his presidency, he went to an Arab summit in the Middle East, and he talked about ISIS and other groups trying to break into the Arab culture. And he said, if they come to you, throw them out. That was a great speech. So I tweeted it was a great speech. I got killed by the left. How dare you say anything nice about him? But the fact is that he should have been encouraged about what he was doing. That was the right thing for him to say at that point. On the other hand, when he says the caravan, the people who are 100 miles away, poor peasants trying to find some sanctuary, are laced with foreign agents and drug dealers and murderers, and we need the army to stop them. You know, what you have to do is be very honest and say there is no evidence of that whatsoever. At the same time, you need members of his own party to come out and say, we don't agree with him.
Well, some people have suggested that there be a boycott of some of President Trump's news or his tweets. How do you feel about that?
Be a what?
A boycott, not cover his Twitter feeds.
Can't do that. You got to cover it. I mean, and I had a little trouble with the idea of boycotting the press room, for example, because of his fight with CNN. I do think that I've talked to our correspondents at their initiative. They come to me and said, what do you think? And we're a little uncomfortable with what's going on. I said, get like-minded people. And remember, you're there as reporters. You're not there as people in the ring with him who are going to punch back as hard as he punches you. You're there to tell the people what they need to know, tell what's true and what's not true, and be able to stand back and smile benignly. You know, politicians are constantly trying to bait the journalists, and journalists too often take the bait. There's a lot of self-importance in journalism now. You know, people want to be stars, and they think the breakthrough is to do what we've been seeing. That's wrong.
Well, also, and I'm not attributing this direct connection to President Trump, but journalists are not only under attack by words, but journalism organizations have been sent bombs recently. Other journalists have been attacked.
It's been hard. It was that way. Been that way for a long time. I mean, if you look back at
bombs,
there have not been any bombs directed at us in the same way, but there were journalists in the '60s, for example, who were attacked primarily because they were too left. You know, that they were roughed up when they went to rallies of one kind or another. So it's always been a perilous business, but the important part of journalism is is not to be some kind of a hardcore advocate for a narrow point of view, which is yours. Your job is to do the best job you can for the American audience watching you or reading your books about telling them, in fact, this is what happened. This is the likely consequence of what has been said. This is this part that's been oversold in some part. I think, I spend a lot of time in the American West, and I'm on Main Street out there, and I know, people will say, well, we like you, but we don't like all those guys in suits telling us how to think. I mean, there's a lot of that. And I say to the television producers that I'm close to, got to be a little careful. Gordon Manning, again, had a great line. Gordon Manning used to say that when Casey Stengel was the manager of the Yankees, he would say to Whitey Ford, take a little bit off your fastball, fool them from time to time. That's a pretty good motto for journalists as well.
But you yourself were a target once with someone sent
Keep going.
an anthrax letter to
Yeah.
you. Could you talk about that incident?
Well, that was very consequential. My office was the target of an anthrax attack. My secretary had a very, very traumatic time. She was affected by handling a letter. She had a mass on her upper breast. We didn't know how to deal with it. We sent it to all the best dermatologists in New York quickly and urgently. They had never seen it before. Finally, a friend of mine who had worked a lot in Africa, was a infectious diseases guy, said, I can't rule this out. We finally got the diagnosis. And I just can't tell you what a trauma it was for her and for me and for everybody around her. It came out okay in terms of she got healed. Her daughter was not affected. NBC did the right thing by her in terms of making arrangements for the rest of her life. I felt more threatened in some ways by being in the South in a small town with nobody around me and a guy sheriff pointing a shotgun at me than I did about the anthrax thing. But I'm constantly aware that, for all the glamour of what we do and the kind of recognition on the streets, you can get good tables and restaurants when you want it. It can be a perilous business. And your job is to be a truth teller for the American public. You're an extension of what they need to know. And it's not about you, it's about what you're able to find out and what you're able to share with your audience that they need to know to make a wise decision about being a citizen.
Tom, you've been both print journalist and continue to be, and a broadcast journalist. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each of those mediums?
Run that way.
Sure. Let me put it another way. Print, as David Halberstam once told me, print defines, television amplifies. What is the strength that television can give over print journalism?
Television is the transmission of experience. It has a very human quality about it. If you look at the fires, for example, in California, and the people who lost their homes and how they talk about it, no print journalist can capture that as authentically as a good television correspondent who stands back and lets the camera tell the story and see the emotion, see the loss for what it is. So it's the transmission of that experience. Print journalists, whether it's periodicals or newspapers, really is best at detail, taking complex subjects and dealing with them, sometimes in the abstract. You can't take pictures of everything, for example, and so you need print people to do that. I work hard at staying active as a writer. I'm in a lot of op-ed page pieces. I write essays. I've written books. And one of the reasons I do that is for my own purposes, to help me understand what I'm writing about, and to get into parts of the story that I couldn't take a picture of.
Could you talk about or describe what you see as the difference in roles of a correspondent and a television news anchor?
And a television.
Anchor.
Well, all the anchors at the moment have been correspondents at one time. And that's the best experience for being an anchor. Certainly Lester, had been a correspondent in Los Angeles, and or in San Francisco and Chicago, and then he came here and he became the host of a very successful program. And then he also was a working reporter. David Muir had been in the field for ABC, and Mr. Gore, who's the new one at CBS, had also worked as a correspondent. I think that's important, so you know what's going on. Earlier ones, Chet Huntley was really never a reporter. He was a newscaster, and David had been a reporter. Walter was a quintessential working reporter, covered World War II, and all the stuff that came after that, the space program. I always thought that Dan, Peter, and I were the kind of, if you will, I don't want this to sound too inflated, but we were representative of our generation. We'd been working correspondents first. Peter said one night at a farewell dinner for me, people often ask me, do you get along? And he said, yes, because we don't see each other that often. And then he added quickly, because we have shared values. We love being reporters, and then our skills as reporters make us better as anchors.
And an anchor can be the kind of person, this is a question, who people will go to when they need to trust the information they're getting. Is that an important aspect? Trust.
I think trust is really important. I'm stopped a lot on the street these days by people who say, "Oh, we miss you, Mr. Brokaw. I really trust you." I said, "You can trust him now. The reason you miss me is that I didn't have this kind of political turmoil that I was bringing you every night, and you long for that time, and that's a time gone by." I also think that, and I've talked, there's nothing we can do about it. This is the evolution of the business. The 24/7 coverage is just a tsunami of stuff coming at you. And it's what I often say to people is that, I don't know about your television set, but mine has an off button as well as an on button. And you have to be able to, regulate that.
You've been both a reporter and an analyst. Could you describe the different challenges and the different roles of an analyst and a reporter?
Well, I think being a good reporter is a necessary training for being an analyst. If you see things firsthand and you're reporting, I didn't arrive in Los Angeles and suddenly overnight say I'm an analyst here. I learned about the culture and the politics of that state and what was going on, and then I had enough confidence in what I knew to share what my judgments were. I think that's true of any anchor. Peter had a great grasp of the Middle East, for example, because he had spent a lot of time there. Dan had been in Vietnam. And those experiences help you as an anchor because you have the confidence to be an analyst as well. So that's how it works. Mostly it's anchormen or anchor women don't arrive full-blown in the cradle as in those roles.
I'm got a few more questions just to give you a sense as I know this has been long. So just a few more questions. Looking back on your career, what do you think was the best advice you were given as a young reporter, as a young man?
It's not about you, it's about the story. I think that there's a kind of a vanity built-in factor in television and broadcasting. People recognize you on the streets. You pay more attention to your wardrobe. I used to say to my newspaper friends, don't make fun of my wardrobe. I know that you dress down only because you're trying not to be one of us. But I knew a lot of, I mean, the Bernie Calb, for example, paid a lot of attention to what he was wearing. Peter Jennings paid a lot of attention to what he was wearing, an old-fashioned guy. Johnny Apple at the New York Times would always say to me, Brokaw, have you been to this store in London, for example? I mean, there was that. So I've never paid that much attention to the wardrobe. Every time a newspaper guy does a story about somebody in the field, they'll talk about the safari jackets that we take with us. We take the safari jackets, they got a lot of pockets. And we've got little tape recorders in this one, we got a cell phone in this one, we've got a notebook in the other one. And we're kind of wired for sound, so that's why we wear those jackets. It's not just a dashing thing.
Advice you'd give to a young journalist starting out today?
Well, first of all, begin with an enormous appetite for knowledge and for understanding what is going on around you. The world is changing constantly. For example, if I were starting over, I may want to go to work for Bloomberg because of the range of outlets that they have and the things that they do. And I would say to a young journalist today, always try to stay ahead of the changes that are going on, not behind them. News is about change. What's new? What's different? What do you need to know? So what you want to do is stay on the cusp of that change so that your audience, whether it's print or electronic, is well served by what you have to do. It's not about you. It's about the people who read what you write or hear what you have to say or see what you have to say. That's your mission. And if you are faithful to that, you'll have a very rewarding career.
Your proudest achievement?
I got it mostly right. Not always, but I got it mostly right.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, the way I'd like to be remembered is the point guard for the Chicago, Phoenix. No, the way I like to be remembered is just that he was an honest broker for all of us in terms of passing along information that we needed and deserved to know. And you cannot do what I did or any of us in this business did without having ego. There's no question about that. There's a vanity part of it. I don't deny that. I do pay attention even to this day, even though I'm not on the air every night, about what time I'm going to wear and what shirt I'm going to put on. But at the end of the day, people respond to what you're doing if they believe that you have personal integrity and that you're fair about the treatment of all the elements that you're dealing with.
I have two more questions for you.
Two more. I don't know. We'll have to ask Mr. Brokaw if he'll accept
If
it.
that's all right. Well, you've written so much about the greatest generation.
No.
I just think it would be instructive to learn what you think we can learn from history.
Yeah, okay. One of the defining parts of my career, obviously, was print. I wrote a book called The Greatest Generation based on a television experience of going to Normandy for the first time on the 40th anniversary. I'd grown up during World War II. And then I had been raised by that generation because I lived on quasi-military bases, and my high school coaches and teachers and other people had all come through that experience. But I went to Normandy, and that was the distillation for me of who they were. And I came back and I started collecting their stories, and I was frankly overwhelmed by what I was hearing and seeing and experiencing. And I decided that it probably should be a book, and when I took it to Random House, where I was under contract, it was like, for them, it was nirvana. Oh my God, how come no one has thought about this before? So I wrote the book in a year, and it was and remains the American story about the people of that time who rose up out of the Depression and joined arms and defeated the greatest threat to mankind the world has ever known, Adolf Hitler, who wanted to seize every country, change every culture, and become a maniacal despot for the entire globe. no question about it. And to achieve those aims, he would resort to whatever cruelties were necessary, not just the Holocaust, but how his troops behaved in the fields as well. And of all the things I've done, I've never had a more profound reaction to that. And I think that it was, for younger people, a realization of how lucky they were to have those kinds of Americans as their parents and grandparents. For the people who went through that, how grateful they were that they were able to make that kind of contribution to history and to emerge with a renewed sense about the pride that they have in this country and their fellow citizens.
We, while not the crisis of World War II, many feel that our country today is under some crisis, our Constitution is under some stress.
Well, the difference between then and now is, and I feel this profoundly, everybody was involved in the World War II. I mean, if you did, my dad didn't put on a uniform. He went off to join the Seabees. They brought him back to the base because he made the base run. Women were typists in Washington filing things. Medical people were inventing new forms of treating war wounds, that kind of thing. Farmers grew more food so the troops would have enough to eat. Everybody was involved. Now, less than 1% of our population is in military uniform and thinking about it on a daily basis. That's a huge difference. And at the same time, those people who do go into uniform and are dispatched to Afghanistan or Central Africa or to Iraq bring discipline and commitment and pride in what they're doing. And they're defending the values that the rest of us all share and pay not a very big price for having that as part of our lives. So I'm a big fan of the people who are serving in uniform now. We're going to hear more from them because they're coming back and running for office. They're starting new organizations, and they're doing what needs to be done.
Tom Brokaw, thank you very much for giving us your time and these wonderful stories for the interview, An Oral History of Television.
Thank you. You know, most people in my business love to talk about themselves, and I'm no exception.
We appreciate your patience with us.
Yes.
Okay, we're